I want to say thank you so much for all of you who have been able to manage to come to this session. And I'm going to right away hand over the mantle to Wesley and Rachel, so that they can take us now through the charter. Welcome.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm just going to launch my presentation. Always that moment of fear. Can everyone see okay? Yeah.
Perfect.
Great. All right. Well, as we were saying earlier, yeah, we both work for Amref in very different capacities. And we've just got back from a week-long workshop with our comms and fundraising leads from across the organization. So Amref is headquartered in Nairobi, and then we have about 10 offices in different African countries where we implement our project work. And we have another kind of dozen offices in Europe and North America that mainly do fundraising and partnerships and a bit of advocacy too. And so what we've been trying to do over the past couple of years is kind of create a bit more harmony across those different offices and markets in terms of the way we talk about our work. And I think we have found the work that you all are doing really useful. I think you've done such interesting and structured thinking, and we know that there's a lot we can learn from you. So today we're here to present just a few bits and pieces, some of the things we've learned over the past couple of years, including one very concrete example. But we'd love to hear what all of you have been working on. Cordelia, I'm keen to hear more about your photo diary project. And if there's anything we say as we go along that isn't clear, or that you want to hear more about, or that you disagree with, then please don't hesitate to interject as we go. We've got a few slides, and then there's loads of time for discussion towards the end. So yeah, just to say, we really loved your Charter Point 8. We thought it was it encapsulated everything that we, I think, have been kind of striving to do at Amref with varied success over the past couple of years. And I think that particularly that point around causing harm and reinforcing racism through very persistent stereotypes is something that spoke to us particularly. And we just, this is a quote from a book that we really recommend called Africa is Not a Country, by a British Nigerian author. I think it's just out in paperback. And I think it encapsulates really nicely that tension between impact and intention, which comes across in your charter point, and also the notion of power and the power that we have as NGOs, which doesn't always sit comfortably with us. I think it's quite tricky to kind of navigate and negotiate that power. And that's something that Wesley and I have tried to keep kind of front of mind in our work. Wesley, over to you. Oh, we can't hear you.
So we think that, you know, sort of our work is just a really small part of the bigger sort of work around anti-racism, because anti-racism is much broader, going all the way from structural, and there are other deeper conversations going on. But we just think that from our area, from our segment, we think that the steps of the journey, you know, needs to sort of begin. And there is that understanding that stories really are windows to how we get to know about communities, about societies abroad, and realizing that when we have platforms as nonprofits or non-governmental organizations, we have the power to shape perceptions, to shape even realities, agreed realities sometimes. And we think that one of the biggest role is to really redistribute the power, given the position that most nonprofits really do have in sort of creating those perceptions around how we tell stories, not just about Africa in this case, but those we think There have been stereotypes that have been told about them that have been reinforced over a long period of time. And then we have that opportunity to retell those stories moving forward. Good. Rachel, over to you.
Thanks, Wes. So what we're going to talk to you about today is one example, a project that you may have already read about called Who Owns the Story? And it was an attempt to address that last point that Wesley made. So thinking about kind of opening up, I think, our editorial processes. So not just the process, but the end product, the whole sort of contents or story life cycle, and thinking about where we had opportunities to redistribute power and give people, the people we support, more control over how they are depicted. So this was a project that we did in partnership with the University of East Anglia and the University of the Arts, London. We started in 2020, I think, the conversation, and it was a bit derailed by the pandemic, but we were finally able to implement it in 2021. So this is, it's just one example. And I think, as Wesley has said, we definitely don't feel like we are experts at all. We are also constantly learning, and we don't think this is the way forward, but it's our way forward. And it's something that we learn a lot from, and we're trying to now implement the lessons across our storytelling. So this is a photo from a workshop that we held in Nairobi in the spring of 2021. And it was, what we did was a participatory photography project. So we brought together 4 community health workers that we support in Kibera in Nairobi, which is one of the most photographed informal settlements in Africa, if not the world. So the people of Kibera are very accustomed to having photographers and videographers and NGOs and even tourists come and kind of look at them and document their lives. And this was an opportunity, we hoped, for them to kind of take control of that narrative and depict the Kibera that they wanted the outside world to see. And the research dimension came in because what we did was, so we brought the 4 community health workers together and we gave them almost free rein. So we did a couple of days of training in the fundamentals of photography. So they learned about, framing, lighting, composition, how to tell a story through images. And for most of them, it was the first time they'd used a camera rather than a phone camera. And then we sent them out back to their daily lives and asked them to pick one theme, one kind of challenge, a health challenge that the communities they serve were dealing with, and to document that story. And so they all came back, looked at each other's stories, and then they voted on the one they prepared, the one they preferred, they felt was most compelling. And that story was transformed into a mailing, an appeal, that was sent out to the database of Amref Health Africa's UK supporters. So that's about 1,800 people in the UK. And we A/B tested it. So we ran this appeal, which was, we called the unmediated appeal, against a more sort of classic appeal. So one unmediated appeal in the voice of the community health worker. Let me show you. Okay, sorry, hang on. There he is. That's Patrick Malaki. He's a community health worker in Kibera and has been for about 20 years. So you might well know that in Kenya, community health workers aren't paid for that work. So, and actually Amref does a lot of advocacy around trying to change that. But for the moment, this is a voluntary role that they all do on top of various income generating activities. So Patrick was the winning storyteller, and we wrote his appeal. He wrote his appeal. So all the images were taken by Patrick. He decided on the layout of the appeal. He wrote the text, and he had full editorial control with the exception of the kind of shape of the letter. And his appeal went out to half of our database, and the other half received a more sort of classic, what we called mediated appeal, written in the voice of our chief exec, our UK chief exec. So what we wanted to find out by running the 2 almost in competition was to see how our existing donors responded both financially and emotionally, to stories of poverty controlled and created by the people we refer to as contributors. So we wanted to see, I think one of the things we have noticed is that in conversations around ethical storytelling and anti-racism in INGO communications, there's an assumption that stories told differently and more democratically won't be as powerful. And that's, I think, something we were wanting to question. We don't want to believe that that's true. And we also want to believe that our supporters, our audiences in the UK and beyond are ready for different stories, but we need to give them the chance. I think we need to trust them and give them credit, I think, to respond to stories that they might not expect to hear from us. So this is Patrick's appeal, and all the images were taken by him. So the angle he chose was older people and the obstacles they face in accessing healthcare in Canberra, which are many: physical, financial, related to stigma as well. And it's a story that we at Amref probably don't tell very often. So that in itself was really interesting. And this is the letter that went out to our supporters. And everything here was decided by Patrick. And these are his words. And we'll share the slides after today so that you can have a look in more detail. And so what was really interesting is that it was, for us, this was a successful mailing, a successful appeal. The two mailings raised over £13,000, which was in excess of our target of 11. And interestingly, Patrick's unmediated appeal raised more money. So slightly fewer people gave to Patrick's appeal, but those who did gave substantially more. And that the sort of average donation made to Patrick's appeal was significantly higher than we were expecting, and much higher than with previous appeals. So although it was a small sample size, and there's definitely a need for more studies like this, we found it really interesting, and it wasn't necessarily what we were expecting. But I think beyond the actual numbers, beyond the money that we raised, we learned a lot. And we followed up with a survey to all the people who gave to Patrick's appeal, and we asked them what it was that had moved them, that had inspired them to give. Because when they received the appeal, they didn't know that they were being experimented on. They didn't know they were part of this A/B test. And we also followed up with in-depth interviews with the participants, so Patrick and the other 3 community health workers. And what we determined through that was, well, it became clear that the participants, Patrick and the others, felt a sense of ownership. So they felt this was an opportunity to represent the community that they belong to and serve. And I think for us, one key takeaway was, this idea of redefining what we consider success. So even though the end product was a really fantastic appeal, and it met its targets, it surpassed its targets, but beyond that, the fact that Patrick and the other community health workers had a positive experience for us was equally important. And I think that has helped us to shift our focus to look more sort of holistically at our content production processes as well as the end result. And what was also interesting was that our supporters in the UK felt a sense of connection with the stories, and they saw Patrick as the agent of change that he is. So his kind of dynamism and his passion for his work came across really, really clearly, and they really his words resonated with our supporters to the extent that they were moved to take action. So I think, and even we were quite surprised, I think, by the thoughtfulness of our supporters. A lot of them talked about sort of old narratives that they'd become accustomed to. A couple even mentioned colonialism and talked about power dynamics. And I think we were pleasantly, surprised. Perhaps we learned that we were underestimating our supporters and where they are at in their own thinking. And I think one big takeaway was this idea that, letting go of what we think the story is. So not just how the story is told, but what the story is. So we, as I mentioned, that we'd given the 4 CHWs a free rein to decide what they wanted to focus on. And this was spring of 2021. So we were expecting that all of them in some way would talk about COVID, and actually none of them did. So Patrick talked about older people, One of the others mentioned malnutrition. One of them talked about solid waste in Kibera, and the other one was, I think, maternal health. So they were all very different, and it really taught us that so often we go in thinking we know what the story is, but actually when we sort of open up that process, we might find that there's another story altogether, one we would never have thought of telling. And as it turned out, it was a much more compelling one than what we would have come up with ourselves. So yeah, people know what they need, and people know what's important to them. And yes, the other thing that we learned from this was just that I think it gave renewed momentum to these conversations across the organization. So it probably started in our kind of fundraising markets, where conversations around decolonizing our sector and anti-racism are very live. But it's been really interesting because we've been able to extend those conversations across the organization to contexts where those conversations aren't happening so much, in Europe, North America, and also in the African countries where we work. Wesley, I think, is this you? Is this you? You can see how slick we are. Is this you? Yes.
Yeah,
so
thinking.
Slick. Thank you. So thinking about what we've learned and how we're applying those lessons, we kind of translated them into this set of principles, which Wesley will present.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, you very slick. So thinking about that, I think Patrick's approach really sort of, we think, brings it down to these 5 principles that we've been thinking about when we're developing the handbook on best practices. And or at least from our thinking, is that we're really recognizing that power imbalances or inequalities will exist, sometimes whether we would like, whether we know whether we assume they exist or not, we know that these things are there. And so these 5 principles we think would guide how we then get to tell the story. What Rachel said earlier on, the end product is as good as the process, and we think that being keen to these principles would probably sort of qualify the process of telling the story. So thinking about it being people-centered, but really means that the communities we want to amplify their voices. So looking at the example of Patrick, while the whole world was thinking that COVID is the problem in Kibera, for people like Patrick who live and work in the community, for him it was the elderly, the problems they're going through. So it's really amplifying what they see as the priorities, doing no harm, ensuring that we don't leave them more vulnerable than we do based on the stories that we tell. And it's really thinking about, if we are going to tell the stories of a person, will I leave them more vulnerable based on this situation or the circumstances that they're in? And one of the other thing that I think is really important is thinking about the lifespan of a photo. And this is really people-centered. If you're going to spend, bringing down how much longer you can use someone's photo in how you deliver or how you tell their stories. So bring it really down, because when you're taking a single photo, it's just that one moment of their lives. In 3 years, they'll probably be a totally different person. So it's really important to think about that as well. Having inclusive language, thinking about, should we be saying beneficiaries, for example, or are there more actively words that are more inclusive, because beneficiaries sort of put communities as less active and more passive in international aid. So thinking about those things much more consciously, and just being respectful to the communities. In terms of being authentic, I think it's very much related to being people-centered, because you want to tell stories in a nuanced approach. So not just, yes, we would like to show the challenges that they are going through, but we also want to show how they live as human beings, because we don't want them to be defined not just by their problem, but by the days that they have, their happiness and the joys of life they have, their hopes for the future. So really taking that approach and letting them tell those stories, because we know there's different definition about how we can talk about dignity, but just ensuring that we provide a basic context to how we tell the narratives. And I think one of the other things is also really trying to work with the local creatives as part of being authentic, because I guess there are two ways to look at it. One of them is that the local creatives understand the local community, and also it gives an opportunity to sort of give back the resources to them to tell those stories, and valuing what they say, because they understand the communities that they are working with. And obviously you want to be more collaborative, and that means you co-create. So whether you're working, and this has several layers to it. It has the community, it has the project people that you're working with, giving them a decision to say, oh, maybe I think we could use this, as part of, rather than that. So no, not really. So really not speaking or deciding on their behalf, but them thinking or knowing that they are part of the process, and ensuring that we also close the loop. So once you're done with getting the content, and you have sort of processed the outputs, how do you close the loop? How do you make sure that they look at it and they feel, oh, maybe this I'm being represented in a way that I'm happy about, and I'd like to show people that, hey, look, I am part of the whole story. So thinking about how do you close the loop? Would you, for example, ensure that they get some of those samples or some of those outputs, and it sometimes increases the journey of how we deliver the content, but it's worth it. It's the least we think we can do in closing that loop. And ultimately, we think all this is about really being power conscious, because it's about, earlier on we had talked about recognizing that it's about redistributing the power. Those who we are involving in the process, how do we ensure that the power is redistributed? Is by making them decide on the stories they want to tell, for example. So really providing a platform where people can tell their own stories in a way that represents them. So you want to make it more interactive. So sometimes, again, it kind of increases the process, but I think it's what you will realize that it's worth it at the end, because there'll be more, as Rachel earlier on was referring to Patrick, people sort of responded to Patrick's story because they felt it was more authentic, and Patrick had the power to decide how he wanted to represent his community in the informal setup in Kenya. And also, I think the most important one is really being accountable. I think it's about questioning what we believe in sometimes. You question your assumptions, and asking the people that you work with locally. And if we make a mistake, you really own up and say, probably we have been misrepresenting this, but then how can we make it better? And being thoughtful and listening to some of those feedbacks that come from the communities and the people that we work with. So in a sense, it's really is a promise that, because ultimately the communities are at the center of the work that we are doing. So our promise to them, we feel, or at least we would like to think, is based on these 5 principles of how we get to tell their stories. So Rachel, I think it's over to you.
Thanks, Wes. Yeah, I think that point around accountability picks up on what you guys have put in your Charter Point 8 as well. I think it's about recognizing that at an individual level and an organizational level, as you said earlier, Kath, we are on a journey and we know we're not going to get it right every time, but I guess we've thought a lot about how we prepare for what we do when we don't get it right, and how we have mechanisms in place to hold ourselves and each other to account, and make sure we do better next time. So with that in mind, we put together, is it going to let me do it? Is it? Yes, there we go. We put together what we call an ethical storytelling checklist, and I don't think we've got time to go through it in detail, but we'll share the slides. And we thought that it was quite a useful thing to share with all of you, because it's quite practical and it's maybe the type of thing you could adapt to your own organization. So because as Wesley said, we're really trying to rethink just everything we do when it comes to content production, and it can feel quite overwhelming, and you can question your judgment, and that's good to a degree. But we found that we wanted a kind of framework that we could use to make sure we were asking ourselves the right questions. So there isn't always a clear answer to these questions, and the answer will be different from one situation to another, but we thought it was quite a helpful way for us to make sure we were in the right frame of mind. And you'll see the idea of power coming through again here, even thinking about, approaching every interaction, thinking about who has power and, all the different kinds of power, visible, but also invisible and hidden. So we'll share this with you. It's quite lengthy. But yeah, just to sort of finish on a very practical note, we thought that you might want to know what were some of the sort of more practical, not necessarily very resource intensive changes that we can make, because the project that we presented, Who Owns the Story, that was something we were able to do because we had funding from the two universities we were working with. So it's quite an ambitious project, and it's not something we would have been able to do alone. So zooming out a little bit, I think these are some quite practical places that you can start. And especially if you're trying to sort of build momentum within your organization, it can feel a bit overwhelming if you start thinking that you need to change everything you do. And I think when it comes to sort of reviewing and revisiting the way our whole sector has been doing things for decades, to come back to that quote from Tipo Faloyan at the beginning, we feel that even quite small changes can be very meaningful, because it's all about sort of chipping away at this kind of stereotype of the African continent that we are all kind of responsible for having created. So yeah, I think these are lots of different ways you can approach it. There's lots of hooks, there's lots of ins. And I think it also depends what your team is interested in and open to, but I think that there's lots of different ways you can approach and open these conversations, and these are some of the ways we've done that. And ultimately, it's a mindset shift, which is probably the most difficult thing to change, the way we think in our organizational cultures. But there are lots of places to start, and all you can really do is start where you are. Trite but true. And that's what we've done. That's what we've tried to do at Amref, I think. Wesley, do you have anything else to add here? I'm just conscious of time, as usual.
No, not really. I think that your last point is quite important about cultural shift. So it's really, I think starting to have the conversations is already a good start. So think about them and be conscious that and just being conscious that it's a journey, and in itself we get to improve as we go along. So yeah, I think that's really it. So I think, like you, I think I'm also conscious of the time.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rachel and Wesley. What a wonderful presentation. We really appreciate. Thank you so much. So, and as you are presenting, you are reminding me of of so many instances. For the information of the audience, I'm a woman living with disability, and I live in remote parts of Meru, so in Kenya. And when you talk about the issue of storytelling and ownership, I really resonate with that. Thank you so much. So maybe before we give the audience time to react, I would like to ask Wesley and Rachel this question. Given that Cymru and the anti-racism community of practice, we work with, our work is really around smaller charities. So I would just ask you if you can just tell us what it means to have dignity in photographs and stories? And how do you do this in a budget-friendly way?
Wesley, I nominate you to answer that question.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Lucy. And I think that's a really good question. And just thinking about, what you were saying earlier, we think that dignity is a very subjective word, and we can all come up with different ways of explaining it. But I think it's most important that people know that they have a choice, not just a choice to decide on what story they want to tell, but also the choice to say no to those stories we want to talk about. For them to understand that as part of the process, saying no is still an answer that we can accept. And when we do that, as we're getting the stories, I think there are about 3 questions that you were thinking about that we can factor in to ensure that we're selling a dignified story in terms of images or stories. For example, you can ask yourself, how will the story that I'm about to tell impact the contributor's safety, for example? Will it? If the answer is yes or maybe, just those 2, yes or maybe, then probably you don't have to tell that story. You have to find a different way of telling the story. Or how will it impact the contributor? If the answer is positively, obviously we want to tell that story, but they've got to know that they have that power to talk about it. It sort of dignifies them. And the other point about dignity is telling the complete story is also very dignified, because if you're going to show a small bit of you're going to take a photo that represents a small part of someone's life and use that to represent the entire story, then in terms of telling the story, that means there's some things that we are missing. So really trying to give it a complete view. And earlier on we said that stories is a window to societies. So you want to give it a much broader and a much contextual look. And in terms of a budget-friendly way, some of these processes means there is an extra step you need to do. So, I mean, we have to recognize that there is a cost that goes to this, Lucy. But again, think about the overall, what it also means to how we get to tell those stories. But one of the more practical things that we're thinking about is, if you're working with the local communities, maybe at the beginning, consider a much broader capacity building, for example, for them to understand what this means. And you can decide to be doing it either annually or biannually. You can just come up with a schedule. And this way you get to talk to a broader stakeholders and those people who are really involved in getting the content. So that's number 1. Number 2 is you just ensure that they also have the right toolkits. So that means that as you're training them, you're providing them with, maybe you need to be, this is how we can be captioning our images to ensure that we're capturing all the essential information. So it kind of, ultimately, it becomes more representative as opposed to just quickly going to communities and coming back. Yes, it's an extra step, but I think at the end it's worth it. And that's just my take. Rachel, I don't know whether you have any thoughts around that.
No, I think the only thing I would add is just when it comes to choice, probably, I think one of the most impactful things you can do is to review your consent policy and practices. I think that's how making sure people are giving consent fully and freely, and that they really know what they're consenting to, I think is one of the most meaningful changes any of us can make. And that doesn't have a financial cost as such, though it does take a lot of time and thought. But as Wesley says, I mean, in terms of what people are consenting to, especially when we're publishing things online. We really can't guarantee where an image will end up or in what context and who will see it, because we can do it. There's a lot we can do to control the image when it's in our possession, but once it's online, we really sort of lose that control. And I think it's really important to make that clear to people, so that we're making a promise we can actually keep. Yeah. Thanks, Lucy. Great question.
Lucy, you're on mute.
No.
You're back on mute.
Yes.
Okay. Now I'm unmuted. So I was saying thank you very much for those insights. Just allow me to ask you a few more questions, if you don't mind, Rachel and Wesley. What do you think can be done on the ground? As in, how do we increase the knowledge of how images and stories are used so that the subjects or the participants have more autonomy over their image and story?
You go, Rich.
Thanks. Well, I think one thing we're trying to get better at Amref is showing people, as Wesley said earlier, the end result and giving them the opportunity to give feedback. Because it's one thing consenting to having your picture taken, but you can feel quite differently about it when you see your photo in context or your words as they've been interpreted and edited. So I think that's a big thing that we can all do, is, as Wesley said earlier, kind of close that loop. And even when you begin the conversation, when you are coming to the person and saying, look, this is what we'd like to do, how do you feel about it? Having some very concrete examples that you can show them, probably hard copies of previous magazines or newsletters or mailings, just so that they already have an idea of what it might look like in context. I think it's quite helpful. Although by no means a solution to all of the questions that we've been discussing. Let's see if you've got something to add. I can see there's a question from Anna as well in the chat.
Yes. That's what I wanted to say, that I will give Anna some time to ask a question. Then I will continue. I have two more questions for you. Two more questions. Yeah, Anna.
Hi, thank you. I'll be quick, Lucy. We've done something similar for the first time at the organisation I work at, Size of Wales. We had some underspend and we distributed small grants to our partner projects. Probably wouldn't have done 3 concurrently on something so new again. But yeah, what I wanted to ask is really practical, because now we're like at the tail end of that. So we used in-country photographers, ideally in-community photographers, but where that wasn't possible, community members shadowed and received kit and stuff. So going forward, the capacity was in community, and that worked really well. Now where we're at, and my internet was glitching at the beginning of the presentation, so sorry if you spoke on this and I missed it, but as soon as you're back, at your office and you're then editing and curating the content, that obviously forms a role where power is kind of, I guess, redistributed once again. So that's a difficult thing to manage, but also just this sheer volume of content that comes in, and trying to work through that. It's come in different formats from the different projects, captioned in different ways. It's quite difficult. I think my question is, how kind of much instruction did you have about, this is how we'd like to receive the data? Can you please caption, translating video content? It's like the really practical stuff, because now I'm lumped with a lot of content, and I'm like, okay, it's a lot of time to work through this. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it at the moment.
Rachel, Wesley, do you want to react on that?
That's one for Wesley. I think that's also his burden to bear. Yeah,
well, Anna, I think that's a really good question, and I am with you, because I understand what you're meaning. What you mean, sometimes you get this overwhelming amount of content that you like. How are we going to deal with this? But I think one of the ways is to think about, and we were just discussing this last week, is think about how a story or an image moves from one part of production to the end of it. That's sort of the circle of it. And practically is to standardize the process about how that image moves across. So planning is the most important bit. So for our case is coming up with templates that we then redistribute or distribute to the country offices or the project team. So one of the, I think for your case, for example, there are 3 templates that I would quickly just recommend. One of them is the photo caption templates, where you standardize that so that when the communities you're working with are sort of sending back the documents, all of them are sort of standardized in a template that you have provided. The other one is when you're working on, when you're working at the planning stage, think about all these things. Who will I involve? If it's about the translator, who do I need to translate? And then you provide them with a time-coded transcript. So that way, you're not just getting a translations, you're getting the actual thing, that you're not getting an interpretation, you're getting a translation of what the people said. So that's number 2. Number 3 is in terms, you can always, run. I think, again, it's just about distributing and talking to those, the content creators at the local level about this template. So you can create your own case study templates that they can always be filling and insist on some standardized measures that you want to work with. So when they are coming to you, they're a bit manageable rather than it coming in different formats and that kind of thing. And again, you can put like a checklist. So one of the things is, does it have an informed consent? And ensuring that as you're getting the content, the consent has, for example, or key details like the phone numbers of the contributors, so that if at some point there's need to do like an update follow-up, you have that with you, and you understand that closing that loop is also, you sort of have everything with you, so to speak. I feel like there's something I've forgotten, but if I think about it, I'll just mention it. Anna, yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Anne, for that question, because, Anna, when you asked that question, you've saved me one of my questions, because I I too had a question on consent, and I think it is Wesley has really alluded to it, and I don't have to ask him that question again, because he's just spoken so deeply into it. But kindly, could you mention something about safeguarding? Yes, kindly. Let's hear something about safeguarding.
Rachel, I think that's you.
Wow, just constant betrayal. I think so neither of us is a safeguarding expert, and we're very conscious of that. So as we've been writing our best practice guidance, we are hoping to pull in a level of review by one of our safeguarding colleagues. And I think one thing we realize is that we would love to see the day when ethical approaches to storytelling are taken as seriously as safeguarding, because the two things are really so linked. When we're given someone's story, it's a gift they give us, but it's also something they entrust us with. And as we were saying right at the start, it's something that we can use responsibly, but also something that can cause quite a lot of harm. So I think one thing we've thought about is just trying to sort of align the two things, really. And again, it comes back to consent, and also I think the point Wesley was making around whether someone feels comfortable telling their story. I think because we often can't guarantee where it will end up, then it's always good to give the option of anonymity, partial or total. There's lots of different ways you can disguise the person's identity, lots of different ways you can represent them without really showing them. And we've also thought about, sometimes people really want to tell their story, especially when they've been through something quite difficult, and they can find the process quite cathartic, but it doesn't mean we have to use or publish the story. So even just having the conversation and having maybe a version of it that you can then give back to them can be quite validating for them. They can see their photo, they can see their words, but we don't always have to put it out into the universe, especially if we're concerned about the risks that that person might face as a result. But yeah, I think my main point is really just to seek advice from people who are more experts in safeguarding. I think we're both very aware of the gaps in our knowledge, and we're potentially aware of the risks, but not quite sure how to mitigate them. Wesley, is there anything else? And oh yes, about children as well. We have specific guidance for children, and making sure that when we're getting consent from kids, we are getting their consent and also the consent of their parent or guardian, but and making sure that we sort of check back in quite regularly. And we have also, in terms of the lifespan of our consent, so for adults we keep things for 5 years, and for kids just 3. Wesley, anything I've missed?
Yeah, I think okay.
I can also attest that you really have spoken into that point, into details. So, members, the questions that I had for our presenters today are over. So I'm giving this floor to other members, maybe to ask questions or just make a comment. Then maybe in the next 5 minutes we'll be done.
Whilst people kind of ram themselves up with the confidence to ask a question, I'm going to launch a poll so that we can have a look at that whilst we're having a think about the questions. But please do go ahead. You can do the poll and talk.
Okay.
I just had a quick question. I know, Kath, you talked about it's a safe space, confidentiality and that sort of thing, but is there anything that we can do in terms of supporting the work Amref are doing in sort of maybe, I don't know, LinkedIn posts or somehow sort of sharing some kind of insights we've had from joining this conversation, or listening to your thoughts on what you're doing on social media like LinkedIn? And it's fine if the answer is no, Chatham House rules or whatever, but I just wanted to ask, is there anything to sort of say something out there about the good work you're doing?
That's really lovely of you, Rachel. Thank you. I mean, for us, it's very much an exchange. I think we are also keen to learn from all of you and what you're thinking and what you're doing. But everything we've said here today, we've said publicly in other forums. So there's absolutely no worries if you do want to post about it, and also ask any questions. I think as I said earlier, we know we're not experts at all. So if there's anything you think we haven't thought about as well, we'd love to hear about it. And we're always very open to collaborating. We've had a lot of conversations. I think because we've been quite open about this work, we've had a lot of interesting conversations with other organizations doing similar thinking. And the sense I get, so I co-chair a working group for Bond, which I'm not sure some of your organizations might be part of, which is called People in the Pictures, which is all about ethical approaches to image making and just storytelling more broadly. And I think what we often find in that group is there's quite a lot of consensus about the direction people want to go in, but there's a lot of nervousness around where to start and the potential risks that we run, especially when it comes to fundraising. So it's really useful to have that space. But all that to say, I think the more kind of sharing we can do and the more we can talk about it, the better, because we all probably want to get to the same place, but we're all at different stages of the journey, and we all need, especially with small organizations, I think it's really vital that we support each other and that we're quite open. And if something you've done saves time or pain for another organisation, then I think that's a win for everybody, really. Was that the answer? And Wesley, do you have anything to add?
Yes, Simbi.
Simbi.
Sorry, Wesley, go ahead. I'll ask after you.
No, I was just going to say, I think it just, Rachel, I think it goes back to just being collaborative. And very important to know that we cannot all be on the same level, same part of the journey. So all of us are at a different stage of it. But then recognizing that we have to do something, I think is a progress in itself. Yeah, thanks.
And when we did that project, Who Owns the Story, it was selfish because it was super useful for us. We knew we'd find out things that we could then use, but we also wanted to kind of contribute to that growing knowledge bank that the whole sector can grow up, can draw on. And I think the more examples we have of organizations doing things differently that we can share openly, the better, especially because we're such a sort of data-driven sector. We really are always trying to make decisions based on the evidence that's out there, and the more evidence we can create together, then the better.
Yeah, sorry. I think my question was just on the challenges sometimes of collaboration, especially when you're coming from completely different contexts. So I think I was just curious as to what advice would you give in those very few first interactions, which can be difficult when you're just trying to, balance out and reach a consensus. Yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, that's a really cute and thoughtful question, Simbi. So I'm assuming when you say collaborative, you mean with between the communities and that kind of thing?
Yes.
So I think challenges will be there because the understanding is different and the context. So you'll always get that get those challenges. But then again, thinking about why we're trying to do, I think for a long time, it's also good to recognize that nonprofits have contributed to a lot about how we have viewed the world in terms of how they've told those stories. And challenges really come up, and sometimes it affects even how the communities want their stories to be told, because it's based on what they have been fed with or what they have seen. And so those challenges come up, and sometimes, excuse me, it comes to a point where, you need to decide on, maybe is there a compromise, for example? And I probably don't have a straight answer, but I think each of the challenges that come are very contextual. So if it's about, I think I'll give an example about consent, for instance. If somebody at the point you've had a whole collaborative approach, and fantastic story you have, but then if it comes to a point where somebody feels they're not comfortable with that story, no matter how good or brilliant that story is a challenge that we can always anticipate. The other one is around fundraising, and Rachel was just saying that earlier on. There's an argument about how we frame, when you frame your stories based on values, or when you frame your stories based on empathy or sympathy, it kind of helps with fundraising. But as you move away from sympathy and more, it also brings down the fundraising aspects. But the only way to know is to try and test and do it. And as Rachel will tell you, people were surprised at what happened with Patrick's story. So we will not know until we test it. As long as we're not harming people, as long as we are not stepping on people's toes, we are doing it in a more ethical way, I think we'll be okay. But Isembe, there is no one good answer to it, but challenges will always come up as you go along. Yeah.
And I think just to build on that, there's a lot of, as Wesley said, we're quite a risk averse sector, and that's right. You know, we have to be responsible, but I think when it comes to fundraising through different kinds of storytelling, maybe our focus is on the wrong kind of risk. I think we tend to focus too much on maybe we'll make less money, but in reality, the biggest risk we run is damaging the relationship we have with communities. And once you lose their trust, it's very hard to get it back. And it affects the work that you're able to do, which is our ultimate purpose. So sometimes when talking about things internally, I think it can be quite useful to frame it that way. And if it means, as Wesley said, that we're producing less content, but that content is more kind of ethically sound and we're more confident about it, and it's been a positive experience for contributors, then I think that's probably good.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Kath, I can see your hand is up. You wanted to say something?
Sorry, it was just really quickly to flag that Cordelia was trying to say something, but we couldn't hear you, Cordelia, because you were on mute. I'll click a button that says ask to unmute, and hopefully then you'll get it. Have you seen it?
Okay.
There we go. Hello.
You hear me now? Yeah. Okay, I've got a question. I'll just explain a bit about what I've been doing over the last decade or so. I've been working with children in Uganda doing photo diaries. I'm also a photographer, and I wanted to get their stories because obviously they're going to come up with different pictures than what I could come up with, a more kind of nuanced picture of what life is like in Uganda. And the main purpose of doing this was to raise awareness and also school links. So I started doing this back in 2009. So we were working with film, and most of what we did were actually hard copies. So they do a photo diary, you know, we'd work together, and I'd teach them a little bit about how to take pictures, give them disposable cameras, and then we'd edit them together, and they would write little stories to go with the pictures. So they were all hard copies. And then it was before, well, kind of social media as it is now. So most of these were kind of used in the context of doing work in schools back in Wales, having them on pop-ups. So, I mean, occasionally, you know, when we could, we used them in the publicity. There's one here, which I don't know if you can see which one of my students did. So it's part of their photo diary showing some of the agricultural work that they helped out with. And they would do drawings as well. So it wasn't just photographs. But I wanted to use them when I could. But I mean, I've got all the hard copies. Some of them have been digitized now. But it was before... yeah, I mean, they knew what they were going to be used for, which was to show to children and schools in Wales, and we did have school links as well. So my question is regarding if we were going to use them now. There's some of the children that we could get in touch with, but I just wondered what the team thought about using them for raising awareness now, because some of the children, we're still in touch with, well, our colleagues in Uganda are, from the community. So some of the children are grown up now and doing other things. So, it would be quite nice to have a follow-up story from, when they did the photo diaries to where they are at now. So I'd just like to know what people think about that, how one would go about that, and the, the consent issues.
Thank you so much. We're done. Good question. Wesley, Rachel.
Yeah, Cornelia, that's a really good one, and lovely drawings they have. The one with the sewing machine, that's really
They've got some wonderful work.
yeah. So I think, as you have rightly put it, they are probably at a different part of their lives now. So they were probably 10-year-old kids or 12-year-old kids at the time, and now they're in their 20s, I suppose, or maybe they're graduating. So in terms and I don't know whether I had mentioned this earlier, but and that's why in your consent processes, maybe for the future, it's always important to have contact in as part of your consent policy, so that it just doesn't help. So contact both ways. So contact for you and contact for them, so that if they ever want, for example, in an unlikely scenario, they don't want their photos published, they can write to you. So that's a thing. The other point is, you having their contacts means that you can then do the follow-ups and say, we would like to do an update story about this. So that means it's a new process now. So
I realize that.
Yeah, so you need to get the consent, because I always imagine, having a photo taken 10 years ago of myself. I think I would like, and probably they'll be happy to have that photo of them 10 years ago. But I think ethically, it's good now to do the process again and say, we want to show where you are at this point. At least that's how I would have done it. I don't know what everyone else thinks about this.
I mean, now you're telling me this. I was when I started doing it. I mean, I worked in London before that with people, which was very different to working in Africa. So I was kind of learning as I was going along, and it was in very different circumstances to how you did your project, which looked very well organized, fewer people, and lots of backup. So I was often working in rural areas, and with quite a large number of young people, and it was not quite as well organized. We didn't quite have the funding back up either, and it was a different time too. Things have moved on a lot. But as regards to using some of because I made sort of like canvases out of some of the photo diaries, which I've exhibited in, schools when I go around, rather than having them on social media. What do you think about that? Using them for awareness raising about the work that we do. I'd be interested to know what you think about that, because there are obviously some of the young people that we can get in touch with through colleagues, but not all of them, not all of the people I worked with.
Yeah, that's I think Rachel will tell you that I don't know how organized Patrick's one was. Was it that organized, Rachel?
No comment.
Yeah.
No, we had more infrastructure. certainly. And it's what you've done is really impressive, given all the constraints you were facing. It's such a lovely idea.
Oh, and the other question I've got for Hub Cymru Africa is about 10 years ago, I did mostly the projects I did were with children, but I did train community workers as well. We did a photography project with them, and they wanted me to come back again, and because it was quite a large group. So I'm just wondering if there's any funding for, doing more of that kind of work in the future.
Yeah, Cordelia, I think that there will be a lot of interest in funding this kind of arts project, particularly, with grassroots and people taking the pictures themselves and challenging the way stories are usually told. Shall you and I have a catch up, like a Zoom after this, and I can have a look at what funding might be available for you? Does that sound like a plan?
Thanks. Yeah, I really enjoyed.
Sorry, I'm just a bit conscious that we've gone 20 minutes over.
Okay, I really enjoyed hearing all your fantastic work. Thanks very much.
Thank you. It's been great to hear from you too. And I think for just in response to your question around consent, I think probably I would, if you get in touch with the ones you can get in touch with, and probably try and phase out the others. But I think you're actually maybe in quite a good position in the sense that those kids now probably are on WhatsApp. They probably have smartphones, and I think having a sort of ongoing relationship with them now will be much easier than it was at the time. And there's maybe even lots of creative possibilities there, maybe to set up like a shared WhatsApp group, or to do some sort of live stream even. They could very well be on social media, and there's lots of different ways you can use that to create connections now, even with the kids in Wales who are no longer.
Yes, well, we're working on it, Yeah, thanks.
All the best. All the best, Cordelia.
Thank you.
Wow. What a good session. So a quick one. Nkatha, do you have anything to say? Because I think we need to wind up.
I really want to say thank you to Wesley and Rachel for giving their time. Really appreciate it. And I've loved your research for so long, and it's lush to have you here and share it. Thank you.
Yeah.
But also to everybody for asking their questions and for being engaged. It's always lovely to see. Thank you very much. And of course, Lucy, thank you.
Thank you so much. Isimbi?
No, I think Nkatha said it all. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And from me, we've had sessions, but this is the most, it was the most engaging, and I just like the way we engage. Time has just passed and people are not, So thank you so much. Wesley and Rachel, you did.
Oh no, Lucy, we've lost you at the last second. As your internet dropped loose.
You've kept us busy, so thank you so much. I hope you can hear me now. Okay, yeah, I was just thanking Wesley and Rachel and everybody who was able to attend this meeting. I just hope, guys, we can keep meeting on other forums, but for this one, I've really enjoyed. Thank you so much from Hub Cymru. Asanteni sana. That is to say thank you very much in Kiswahili.
Yala Manoi, as they say in Uganda.
Right.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks to all of you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Siku njema. Let's keep in touch.
Guys, catch you soon.
Bye.
Bye.